Or we start now.
You're live.
Okay. Give me a second.
Dr. Huaba, you are live.
Give me a second, please. Okay, so Algeria is trying to implement a political and economic reforms that are brought up by the new president in order to deal with challenges that are facing the country. But the pandemic of COVID-19 is making it more difficult for the government to deal with the many challenges, social, economic, and political, in addition to the protest movement that is taking and continuing actually in the country. So we would like to discuss with our panelists these challenges that the country is facing up with, and how is the government going to deal with all these problems, and what are the perspectives of reaching a solution that provides stability and development for the country within its area. So we have with us Dr. Haizam Amirah-Fernández, a senior analyst for the Elcano Institute in Spain, as well as Amel Boubekeur, who is co-director of the Institute for Social Science Research on Algeria, Dalia Ghanem, who is a resident scholar at Malcolm Carnegie Middle East Center in Lebanon, as well as Professor Yahya Zubair, who is a professor of the International Relations and International Management and Director of Research in Geopolitics in Kerr Business School. Is that all the names? Have I pronounced correctly your names, please?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So let's start with Professor Zubair, if you allow us. What are the economic challenges that Algeria is currently facing up with, and what has the government has done so far to tackle these problems?
How much time do I have?
4 minutes, please? Doctor, 4 minutes.
4 minutes, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what I can say at the onset is that, you know, we don't, when dealing with Algeria, because I was asked about the rentier state, I think the diagnosis, there is a consensus on the diagnosis that everybody knows that the rentier state in Algeria can no longer constitute the foundation of the economy. That is, Algeria needs to change its economic system, that it needs to introduce some structural reforms. And there is consensus across the board. The good news is that the government, I think, is becoming more and more cognizant that it could not last any longer. Mm-hmm. We had crises before, precisely because of this dependency on the oil revenues. We had a major crisis in 1986 that everybody remembers, 1990, and then since 2014. It seems to me, at least based on the statements, the official statements, the interviews, the debates that are going on, that Algeria has decided to move away from the rentier economy, and that there is support for it at the highest levels. The subsidy system as well, which is linked to the rent economy, to the rentier system, is also unsustainable due to the fluctuations of the oil prices. And in fact, Algeria missed the boat in some way in the period when the oil revenues were at their highest, because it could have made some changes, some significant changes, some structural reforms when the money was, you know, the revenues were extremely high. That could have happened, and it would have really allowed this to take place without hurting the neediest people, because Algeria's system is based on some sort of redistribution, a social system, which is in itself a good thing, but it has not benefited only the poor. In fact, the argument has been made from some analysts that it has benefited, you know, some of the richest people in the country. So in that sense, recommendation that I will suggest is to review that and focus on the neediest and then establish some sort of system, whether it's taxation or what have you. But clearly, the rentier state has resulted in some inflexible economy of dependence, and that has to really change. I think since you asked me, Sir Wabah, about what positive, the positive is some positive. That is the recent statements regarding or recent decisions to move away from oil and focus on some other extractive industry. I'm referring mostly to phosphates. We know how important phosphates could be, especially phosphate rock for the food industry or for food security in general, not only for Algeria, but also you have a country like India that imports almost 100% of its phosphates from overseas. There was a deal in 2016. Again, Algeria missed the boat on that issue. It's a long discussion over the phosphates, but it seems that it has been put back on the rail and so on. Another positive thing that I believe Algeria could benefit from is the renewable energies. There is now a ministry with Professor Chitour, and I think that is a right step, a step in the right direction if Algeria wants to go in developing those industries. Of course, those of you who are observers of the Algerian scene, you know that has not gone without some problems because of the competition between different ministries, namely the Ministry of Energy. But the renewable energies, of course, the renewable energies cannot be done just by the creation of a ministry, but also in terms of explaining to the Algerian population in general, it's not one ministry or two ministries, but it's all the ministries, including the Ministry of Transportation and others. Basically, from my perspective in dealing with this political economy scene in Algeria, you can see, it is sometimes frustrating among Algerian scholars and others, is that it's perceptible. That is, what needs to be done is there, but there's always those hurdles, those administrative hurdles that need to be lifted. Now, another issue that I would like to discuss is again the climate. That is, to become aware of the climate change, the impact that it has had on the water and so on. And so again, more insistence on these renewable energies is not just a choice, a luxury choice, but a real necessity. Now, to move away, this decision to move away from the dependency on oil is, as I said, a step in the right direction. There are other extractive industries in Algeria. Besides phosphates, you have iron ore, and I think that there is something being done to revive or to revitalize those sectors. I have, if you allow me, Mr. Chair, I have just a few recommendations, because you can see them. And what is interesting is that both, whether it's the government or the opposition or civil society, are aware of the necessity to change certain things. And one of which is, of course, this is my big baby, that is, good governance is on the top of the agenda. This is the real thing: good governance, transparency, and accountability to move the country forward. The elimination of, or at least the fight against corruption has been one of the most positive things, regardless of what motivations are behind it. But I think it's one of the best things that has happened to Algeria in a long time. Also, the reform of the economy in terms of bringing in, the youth, the startups that have been created, or this move from the Ansage to the new one, and even the change in name. The change in names, I think, is a positive thing in terms of focusing specifically on entrepreneurship, rather than looking at the government as just the provider, but looking at different forces capable of bringing, or getting involved in productive sectors. In other words, that's, I think these are essential. You can see little moves here, but then it doesn't, it's not implemented, and because of the obstacles coming from just with the Algerians, the youth and so on, but also for the whole economic system to become more attractive to the outside world. What has happened, though, is there were some declarations on such moves, but the pandemic has exacerbated, the old issues that are latent and that need to be addressed. So one of my recommendations, of course, is to create this environment, this economic environment that would be appealing to both domestic forces, and there are plenty. Algerians do have an entrepreneurial spirit, and you have some creativity. I wrote some time ago about how during the pandemic, and many people did not pay attention, there were young people in universities who produced respirators and so on that contributed to helping the sick and so on. So that is one of the positive things. The digital economy, the digital economy is a must for Algeria. We know the catastrophe under the previous regime, that they had the means to put in place a digital economy to promote connectivity and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, it hasn't been the case. Also, the subsidies, this is some big issue. I do understand that the legitimacy of the regime rests on this redistributive capacity, but at the same time, it needs to be done. We cannot insist enough. Agriculture is another sector that Algeria could do well in developing. It has done some, but the imports are so humongous, and Algeria has the means to reduce those imports and help the economy. I think there is another recommendation that I have always advocated, that is the diversification of partners around the world. Yes, China is present now, but there are other actors in other emerging markets. Algeria should reduce its dependency on the European Union, for instance, and the association agreements have not been necessarily favorable to the country. So I think Algeria has the means. The energy subsidies, as I said, have to be revised, give more authority to this department, for this ministry for the transition to renewable energies. And I think that Algerians are going to feel it, because it's been 3 years now, I believe, that Algeria has suffered from a drought. Now we're back to shortages of water and so on. So raising the consciousness of civil society organizations and the public at large is a must. Algeria has so much sun; it's blessed by nature, and I think solar energy needs to be developed at its whatever capacities Algeria could have.
Thank you, Professor. Let's move.
Thank you.
Now.
Sorry.
No problem.
Thank you.
Let's move now to Amel Boubekeur, and let's talk about the popular protest that is taking place in Algeria. It has been for for a while now. It started in 2019, and it stopped during the restrictions of the pandemic. But now it has resumed with the easing of restrictions. Could you tell us about this protest movement? We don't know who they are. We don't know. Everybody says that it's spontaneous, yes. But do you have an insight in this protest and who they are? What tendencies do they represent? And how do they evolve? Because every movement has to be identified, and there must be, let's say, if the government wants to interact with this movement, it has to go somewhere. Where do they go if they want to go? We are not here now. We're not. Can you? Yes, please.
Yeah, excuse me for this. No, I was saying thank you for your invitation. It's always a pleasure to be with great colleagues and friends. I believe that the government know who they are. They are pretty much the same people who were there at the very first, during the first demonstrations of the Hirak in February 2019. They are less than they were in February 2019, but still a lot of people are still eager to demonstrate and to be identified with the Hirak. What a new element since the demonstrations have resumed in February 2021, celebrating the 2 years anniversary of the Hirak. I would say, unfortunately, is really the criminalization of the movement and of the demonstrators. We have witnessed a systematic elimination of people who have been active within the Hirak. So students, journalists, lawyers, civil society activists, human rights defenders, unemployed young people from deprived neighborhoods, and so on. These arrests have happened mainly have been mainly illegal because, for the last Friday, for example, we are talking about 600 people who have been arrested all over the country. That's a lot. I was saying that these arrests are illegal because often people are actually arrested while demonstrating. So even sending professors, well-known names, very respected names have been arrested. Sometimes they are kidnapped from home. When they are released, they are warned not to join the demonstrations again. Some have witnessed that they have also been obliged to sign some declaration explaining that they won't join the demonstrations again. And where they are not released, they are immediately prosecuted. And more recently, people have been, for example, convicted 1 year sentence for having demonstrating during or for having demonstrated. So we must notice that constitutionally Algerians have the right to demonstrate. So although the Ministry of Interior has requested last week has declared that he won't allow any demonstrations, and actually not even the Hirak or people who identify themselves with the Hirak have been repressed and prevented to demonstrate by police force, but even firemen, postmen, doctors, and so on. So all kind of demonstrations who are asking for some kind of change in governance have been repressed, and of course people are sacked from their jobs, and there's a lot of consequences after you are arrested by the police. So the main result of this escalation for the past 2-3 months is that unfortunately currently in Algeria there's still no political management of the crisis. While the secret services and state-sponsored media are circulating the usual narratives on the grip of Islamist movement or foreign enemies over the Hirak, well, the legitimacy of the president, of elections, of institutions is dropping, and the prospect of a political normalization of the country is fading away. I would say that it's really the main danger currently, and especially as people now are testifying actually about the torture, about the bad treatment they have experienced, and there's no more trust currently between the Hirak and the government and the police and the secret services, and they are not trustful that there's any kind of willingness on both sides, actually. But of course, members of marchers and demonstrators are much more are the main victims of this repression. There's very little shows that a violent confrontation may be avoided.
The question is, when I said to you that the government needs to go somewhere, it means the movement has to have, I'm not saying that they have to have, but in general, they have to have a representative, someone or a group of people they have to deal with. They don't. There is no, we don't know, at least, we don't know who is in charge or who is leading, who is the leader. And what are the political tendencies, if any, in the movement? Do you have an idea? Do you know what political tendencies are represented, if any? And how can a government deal with a movement without leadership?
Yeah, the Hirak is really a screenshot of the Algerian society, but we have discussed that a lot during the past 2-3 years. But I would say that the difficulty for the Hirak to have had a leadership to emerge is mainly linked to the difficulties to the stalemate in not allowing the Hirak to mature and to discuss a way out, and then some representatives. So this is really repression that is actually preventing the Hirak to have these discussions. But one of the way out the government and the Algerian regime is offering instead is mainly a kind of roadmap that has been traced with first the election of a new president after Bouteflika, which is the current president Tebboune, a referendum on the constitution, and now a legislative election that will take place in June. So I don't think that the Hirak will stop or will disturb this roadmap. It has not been able to do so during the presidential elections and so on. So actually, that's not the aim of the Hirak, as far as they said. They are not. It's not a movement that is willing to get rid of the institutions, and even we have seen an escalation of demands like they should all leave and so on.
We'll come to that.
Yeah. Do you have another question? Yeah, please.
Yeah, we'll come to that. The demands and how, in reality, how are they going to be implemented? Let's move now with Dalia Ghanem.
Okay.
About the reforms and constitutional reforms and that the government has brought, because the new president came to power actually on the premise of a new Algeria. This is the slogan under which he has been elected, and several reforms have been offered, and including the reform or the amendment of the constitution. Dalia Ghanem, how do you see these reforms brought by the new president, promising a new Algeria, and mainly the constitutional amendment, bearing in mind that almost every Algerian president had its constitution.
Exactly. I think, the constitutional amendments proposed by President Tebboune and by the government were a non-event. First because of the low participation level, but it was a non-event because, as you said it, every president who came in Algeria wanted to leave his own trace and wanted his own constitution. And what is, first of all, let us speak about them. There were several 73 amendments covered a wide range of issues, including the separation of powers, fundamental rights, public freedom, the establishment of an independent national electoral authority, the independence of the judiciary, the fight against corruption, and all the abolition of the Constitutional Council and its replacement by a constitutional court. But again, there were two principal reasons for why the referendum was a failure. First of all, we need to keep in mind that back then, the constitutional amendments had been adopted almost 2 months earlier to the referendum. So basically, the government and the upper and lower house of parliament voted for them before even asking the people to do so. And this was the second time that the regime had asked citizens to voice their opinion, the first time being in the election, in the presidential election. That was a disaster. So it was a non-event because I want to say it in one sentence, maybe. The new Algeria is much more like the old Algeria. Nothing really changed. And to start with, there was no problem with the old constitution. On paper, it looked perfect. What is not perfect, it's application on the ground. And yet again, how do you want to talk about human rights in the new constitution while you are exactly at the same time putting people, activists, students, lawyer, academics in jail? So what is it that you are trying to send? What is the message that you want trying to send? Plus, there was, temptation of what we call in French, des tentatives de récupération politique, For instance, the preamble of the constitution mentions the blessed Hirak. And so this is clearly, a tentative of the government to put an end to errors, to put an end to the errors of the past, with starting with this new Algeria. And by taking the Hirak, by integrating the Hirak in its own discourse. But again, I think this effort of the government, of the regime to regain popular legitimacy did not persuade the population. And in fact, I think that it aggravated an already profound legitimacy crisis. I mean, the situation was already bad before the constitution, and the constitution aggravated the case. Why? First, because many Algerians disputed the election of Abdelmajid Tebboune as a president, which took place amid a mass boycott, and clashes with the security forces, especially in the Kabylia region, The abstention rate was officially 58% and ruined basically the authorities' first effort to portray themselves as purveyors of democracy. So this is the first reason why it was a catastrophe. And it aggravated also the legitimacy crisis because it followed an all too familiar pattern for Algerians. We are all really very familiar with this pattern throughout Algeria's recent history. The regime has used referendums and periodic election to maintain a democratic facade, while otherwise doing very little to reform the system and make it more representative. So for many in the country, these were empty gestures designed to perpetuate the regime's longevity. And so, similarly, when it comes to human rights, as I said, the new constitution favors freedom of speech and all those beautiful words. And this is particularly striking because the regime at present has intensified its repression. And we've been witnessing, a pattern of escalation and repression. So again, these empty promises are not going to work. And third, and I will be short, the referendum aggravated the regime's legitimacy crisis because it sidestepped the systematic political changes for which Algerians have called, such as more transparency in decision-making and governance. For instance, let us remember here that the authorities hide the fact that President Tebboune was sick. And there was, an entire cacophony around his departure to Germany, whether he was sick or no. And so this, in the mind of millions of Algerians, triggered the bad memories of Bouteflika's first stroke in 2013.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, thank you so much. Now we move to the other side of the Mediterranean with Dr. Haizam. If you allow me, Doctor, the situation or the challenges Algeria is facing up with are certainly not dissociated, let's say, from its relations with its neighbors and the Mediterranean region. The recent diplomatic tensions with France regarding the history, memory, and the other issues that rose recently. How does these tensions affect the situation in Algeria and Algeria's relations with the EU?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here with this group of excellent scholars and friends. So the Mediterranean is a rough neighborhood, and we see that there is an increase in the number of crises and tensions across the Mediterranean, both in the eastern part and also in the western Mediterranean, which Algeria belongs to. So when trying to answer these questions, we need to take into consideration several dynamics and events. Algeria's relationship with France is a complicated one. It's heavily marked by history. And as you just mentioned, part of the rising tensions in recent times has to do with, part of the debate of reviving a debate about the history of the colonization and the War of Liberation. As many of our viewers surely know, a few months ago, the French President Emmanuel Macron commissioned a report from a French academic and intellectual, Benjamin Stora, to try to bring together or to basically generate some sort of commission to bring recommendations as a way of reconciling a very difficult history that's not that far away from us. And that report that was produced and was presented to the president earlier this year contained a number of recommendations to try to bring together the histories from both sides and to incorporate different voices as a way of healing some of these wounds from the past. And it has generated tensions also because of some of these recommendations that have to do with recognizing, the bad things that were done, or maybe asking for some sort of recognition of the damage provoked to Algeria. And so this is also increasing the tensions between both countries. Now, Algeria's foreign policy has seen a lot of limitations, especially since 2013, when former President Bouteflika fell sick, and the vacuum, in a way, that Algeria left in its neighborhood, including the Mediterranean neighborhood and the Euro-Mediterranean project, was in a way also taken advantage of by other countries, neighboring countries. And this is clear with activism that we've seen by Algeria's Maghrebi rival, Morocco, and its activism in the African continent and beyond. And these regional rivalries have also to do, and this is important to Europe, with a region that is full of conflicts, crises, threats. That is the Sahel, where Algeria has a lot of things to say. And if you look at Mali, if you look at other neighboring countries in the Sahel, in Niger, etc. So this is one thing that links Algeria to Europe, although there are different approaches. Even within Europe, there are different approaches. But something to keep in mind is that Europe is Algeria's main trade partner. Almost half of Algeria's international economic relations are with EU member states, be it selling hydrocarbons or chemicals, etc., or importing from Europe. We are talking about the surrounding of 13 billion euros a year, more or less. There is a slight deficit. And also political relations, diplomatic relations, and in Europe, in different European capitals, the main countries interested in the situation, Algeria, France, Spain, Italy, etc. They are looking at the Algerian process and also the succession or the change in president and social mobilization and the unresolved socio-economic tensions and state society tensions it's worrying to European capitals, especially in a context where there seems to be shrinking revenues from hydrocarbons and a fall in the foreign exchange, foreign reserves in the country, that unless the policies are put in place, and I guess urgently, then that could lead to increased tensions inside Algeria and affecting the neighboring countries, a neighborhood that is already having lots of socioeconomic problems, where the COVID pandemic also came to exacerbate and add to the tensions existing, apart from crises or conflicts with a neighboring country like Libya and the lack of a real solution of reconstruction of the country. So it's a complicated neighborhood, the Mediterranean, the Western Mediterranean as well, and Algeria is a very important player and actor in that neighborhood.
We don't forget Western Sahara issues, which is a main also problem in the region.
Absolutely. It is one of the, when I mentioned the rivalry with Morocco, the neighbor, the Western Sahara is a cause and also a symptom of that rivalry. So yes, there's a lot after President Donald Trump's recognition of Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara and all the the tensions that have increased and the break of the ceasefire that was there. I mean, it's been for a long time. So tensions are on the rise in the Maghreb region.
Okay. Let's catch up now with Dr. Zubair, and where he actually finished his first statement talking about how the government is tackling the problems, the economic problems. We have talked, Dr. Zubair, if you allow me, a lot about the diversification of the economy. It has been a word that has been used over the years, and as you said, even Algeria has now a ministry of renewable energies. In your recommendations, you spoke about diversifying the economy. How is that going to happen? Apart from, as you said, creating a ministry, which is important, but that's not the goal. That's not the objective. And can you tell us about the role of the youth in Algeria in this change, if you may say? You've spoken also about a digital economy. These are two perspectives. The renewable energies, as you said, are moving away from oil and gas, and you have youth also. Algeria is a country of youth. How is the youth going to take part in this shift? Let's say, if there is a possible shift, and what are the steps, the real steps in diversifying this economy and moving away from oil and gas, including digital economy? We are not hearing Dr. Haizam. Yes, please. Go ahead, Doctor. Yes, please, Professor.
Thank you for your questions. They're very, very pertinent. We often talk about the oil curse or, resource curse.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's so much moving away as limiting oneself to using the resource as a positive thing, but not to become dependent on it.
Dependent on it. Yeah.
Okay, so which means that whatever Algeria had built as reserve before it was dilapidated and, wasted in many cases. That's something that can be done. In other words, one needs to plan far ahead. In the past, they said, "Oh, we want to diversify." Like you said it yourself, Mr. Weba. It's known, but now it's a matter of implementing it. Use the resources of the oil. You're not going to do away with oil and gas, but you have other resources that you can use. And I mentioned agriculture. As to the renewable energies, it's not one ministry. It is societal. It is the whole society. It is all the institutions that need to be involved in that. In other words, Algeria needs to wake up to the reality of these renewables, whether in sparing water, being conscious of droughts and so on, but that has to be, it needs vision, it needs leadership to do it and to do it right. Institutionalization is key here, and the fight against the obstacles that are preventing the execution, because sometimes you have great ideas, but then they don't get executed because of the various hurdles or rivalries between institutions or within the very same institution. Now, agriculture has been probably one of the weaknesses in the system. It changed a bit. There is recognition that agriculture is important because you cannot sustain those food imports, and they are a real danger to your food security. It's a national security issue. So, and you can involve the youth. Some experiments with the enseigne, not big, but you can put it in place to encourage, agriculture to develop. But again, you need short-term solutions, but you cannot live with short-term solutions, because the problem in the past is that each time the price of oil went up again, we forget about the long term. And it is precisely what happened with the old regime, which was the fiasco of the old regime, when you had billions and billions of dollars, but it was just to redistribute, to gain social peace and so on, when in fact you could have reformed the economy deeply while sustaining, the social system and focusing on the needy, and also, encouraging the youth to partake in the development of the society, and creating this link between universities, for instance, and industry. In other words, a real economy, not the oligarchs that we have witnessed in the past. That is not sustainable, and we know it. And now we have to recreate this trust between the rulers and the population. And of course, as I said, I'm a firm believer in good governance. Good governance is the way out of the crisis in Algeria. If there is enough vision, enough authority to push towards this accountability and so on, I think Algeria would be, in a short period of time, a real power in the region.
What you wanted to say is the potential is there.
Yes.
The capacity is there. Just what needed to be done is just good governance. There is all the ingredients of a successful country within the means and within the conditions. And all what we need is good governance.
Exactly. The frustration that I mentioned earlier is that in Algeria, you can see the solution. They are in our, in the Algerians' hands, but it needs that push. I'm in a business school. I believe in vision and leadership.
Okay.
That's how you move forward. And Algeria could do it. I am a firm believer in, Algeria making it to be a great nation in the Mediterranean.
Thank you, Professor. Now we move to Amel Boubekeur again, if you allow me. The legislative elections are scheduled for June 12th, and they are going to take place. The government has reiterated again that these elections will take place, and the popular protest is not, doesn't seem to hear the government talking about elections. They called for the boycott, such as for of these elections, and other or mainstream political parties had also called for a boycott. What is going to happen? Are these elections going to take place, and in what way, what shape? We had already elections, and we had already calls for boycott. Regarding now the popular protest, which has come back now, and is there a possibility that these elections will take place with a minimum of legitimacy, or is this movement going to stop these elections?
Yes, no, they are going to happen, I believe so, as the presidential elections did, and the elections and the referendum on the constitution. But I would say that's really not the main issue to focus on currently, to understand Algeria's crisis and Algeria's possible way out of the crisis. As I said earlier, the Hirak has never been an anarchist movement that wants to get rid of the institutions and so on. I believe that what the Hirak could have been, if the repression didn't occur to that scale, it could have been a framework to discuss how change could take place. And the discussion still goes on, but even 4 months ago, people within the Hirak were wondering, will these elections be an opportunity to join in and to change the system from within? But the huge repression that took place provided a negative answer. Now, I think if the repression continues and the elections, we have already seen older parties that have been active during the Bouteflika reign, under the Bouteflika's reign, already put their sons on independent lists and so on. So nothing is really, we don't have to wait that much from elections, has the possibility to make a new leadership emerge or to have a governance that will be more transparent. But the real question now is, what will be the key consequence of the end of the protest or the closure of the Hirak as a space for dialogue, negotiations, and envisioning change, as Yahya was mentioning it? I think that first, there will be no more solid or credible partners for the regime to discuss with. This is also the destructions of the whole generation that could have been the elite of the democratic elite of tomorrow, because basically a lot of them are currently in jail or have left the country. There have been a huge brain drain for the past year in Algeria. Another consequence will be the radicalization of socio-economic demands. And not only with people who identify themselves with the Hirak, even people who actually were ready to believe the promises of Tebboune and were ready to bug some populist arguments once again, have said that, or believe that this time that the government is not able to govern. I mean, currently or today in Algiers, the capital of the country, the National Water Company has announced that there will be no water for a certain amount of time. So people are exasperated with that non-functioning system. A last consequences, I believe, of the closure of the Hirak because of the repression will be, I mean, how we have to ask ourselves about the sustainability of repression and security union approach in front of any proposition, any willingness to participate. Will we see a more radical approach of people from the Hirak, like a call for national strikes, civil disobedience, and so on. I mean, there are a lot of questions. I would say that maybe as a conclusion, there are two ways that we should, or two issues we should very much focus on if the Hirak is erased and repressed, is and if an internal solution can be found between the Hirak and the Algerian representatives or the Algerian regime currently. Well, first, even if the Hirak has been quite cautious to make the Algerian crisis an internal affair, they have started in front of the no responding of the regime to call to international organizations. So some torture cases have been brought to the United Nations and so on, and that's really tricky, especially in Algeria. The second issue we should focus on, and because of course European countries also we have to react, and that could internationalize the country, and we don't know what directions it can take. The second issue we will have to focus on is if Algerians are more and more, how can I put that, locked in, and so will the Algerian economy and politics, well, we are going to find ourselves with Algeria as a country that will be non-functioning, a country which progresses have been delayed very much so by the civil war in the 90s, by the 20 years of corruption and bad governance of Bouteflika. And we should ask ourselves about the cost of a non-functioning country, a crucial and central country as Algeria, that is really per se in the middle of the Mediterranean. So I believe we should urgently think about these two issues to understand Algeria's future and Algeria's future in the region as well.
Is there a concern of radicalization of the protest movement if the elections go on, and they are likely to go on?
Well, as I said, if the fact that we are going to have elections and sons of old leaders, Islamist parties leaders, the Front Libération Nationale, RND, I mean, all these administration parties that were already in place under Bouteflika's era are actually promoting a new generation of their own. But will these elections be able to bring a political management of the crisis? That means that we have to acknowledge that institutions are non-functioning, that we have a huge problem of corruption, that repression is not functioning as well, because repression is nothing new, or it has intensified these past months, but people are obviously not convinced to stop identify with the Hirak, or to stop asking for political changes because of repression. So again, I think we should, in order to avoid this radicalization, and radicalization that won't be framed politically. I mean, by the end of the 2000s and the early 2010s, we had a lot of daily riots in Algeria. And again, nothing has changed, nor for the governments, neither for the demonstrators. So we don't have the luxury to stay in this status quo, specifically for the economic and even COVID consequences that my colleagues have mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Let's move now with Dalia Ghanem about the elections now, if you allow me, Dalia.
Sure.
The elections will take place. We've agreed on that.
Yeah.
Political parties have called for boycott. The protesters have also called for a boycott. Mainstream parties, as known, some of them are going to take part in these elections, including independent candidates, of course. How is what is these elections going to give us? What is the shape of the new parliament? What are the main tendencies?
Yeah. According to Mohammed Shorfi, who is the president of the ANI, which is the Independent National Election Authority, there was more than 800 independent lists and some 600 lists of political parties. And he said that these were accepted without any reserve, which is also worrisome by its, it's worrisome. What does it mean without reserve? And what does it mean also? What does it tell us about the quality and the experience of this so-called independent future potential politician? So as you said, Ahmed, the Front of Socialist Forces, le FFS, declared that he's going to boycott, the RCD as well, the Workers' Party as well. But again, I want to say, and this is to be provocative, what does it really change for us? I mean, these political mainstream parties has been, participating in the political arena for decades now, and they have been co-opted. They are, as a matter of fact, one of the pillars of the regime. So their participation or non-participation doesn't make any difference. But there are other polls that seem to be organized. Three of them created themselves recently. Nida al-Watan, which is the call of the fatherland, al-Masar al-Jadid, which means the new path, and al-Hisn al-Mateen, which I don't really know how to translate, but it would be something like the impenetrable fortress. So Nida al-Watan is a movement bringing together several NGOs and associations. It was created in early May 2021, and it is suspected not only by the opposition, but also by the Hirakis as being, trying to form this electoral cluster to gain as much seats as possible in parliament for the benefit of the authorities, even though they call themselves independent. It is very enlightening, for instance, to see that, for the ceremony of creation of Nida al-Watan, it took place under the chairmanship of the advisor of the President of the Republic in charge of the associative movement. Okay. So really, one can call into question their so-called independence. And then there is Al-Hisn al-Mateen, which is also closer to the component of Nida al-Watan, while Al-Masar al-Jadid explained that it represents many people from the Hirak. So it is basically, trying to surf on the wave of the Hirak, saying that we agreed with some Hirakis who are eager to take part in the political process to take part in this national dialogue that Abdelmajid Tebboune initiated when he became president. Now, the current environment, I would say, seems to be in favor of the Islamists. The Movement for Society of Peace, the MSP, Al-Bina, Al-Islah, and Nahda, they all are participating in this election. And they might achieve what they never achieved actually, or what they've been dreaming to achieve, especially since the Arab Spring, in 2011, when they went into this coalition, La AAV, the Green Coalition, and they tried, to secure as much seats as they could, but they failed. But this time, it seems that the political powers are shifting, and the regime is eager, I would say, to give a predominance to the Islamists in order to play the Islamist card again. And this would, if they dominate the legislative, the election, that would mean that they are going to dominate the legislative and executive powers. Because if they manage to form a majority coalition in the assembly, the new constitution will give them full power to appoint a head of the government and carry out their own political program. So this remains a political ambition. For the moment, of course, these are all predictions, but we will wait and see. And I will finish on that. The question is whether the push by civil society list can stand in the way of this, or whether we will end up with a scattered parliament, a patchwork parliament. I think this is what we are going to see. And finally, for the Hirak, the Hirak has great ambitions, but unfortunately, the Hirak is crossed by different contradictory ideological debates as we've seen recently with the debates around the place of Rashad. And so it is very, very, very difficult for the movement right now to have or to provide the Algerians with an alternative that is different than demonstrating every Friday and every Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Let's move now with Dr. Haizam. Algeria has an environment, to ties with the world, with countries around the world, and the government, when tackling the issues and the challenges they are facing with, have to rely on these ties. We have seen during the pandemic, for instance, the Russian involvement in providing the government with a vaccine, which is called for Russia, a diplomatic vaccine, vaccine diplomacy. The ties between Algeria and Russia go back to history. They're long time, and which is normal. Also, Algeria is strengthening its relations with China and with Turkey. What does this tell you in terms of international relations, and how is these ties going to help Algeria, the government in Algeria, tackle the many challenges they are facing up with?
Yes, sure. As you mentioned, Algeria's relations and alliance with Russia is an old one, and Russia has been the provider of a lot of weapons, of arms that Algeria has imported, becoming the main arms importer or buyer in the African continent. When resources were available, Algeria managed to purchase lots of military hardware from Russia and from other countries close to Russia. What is shifting and what we're seeing, there's a change in recent times, and my colleagues in this panel, Dr. Zubair, and know a lot about the Chinese increased presence and influence and interest in Algeria, among other countries. So China has become, I think in 2019, has become Algeria's largest source of imports, surpassing France. And that is due to several reasons why Algeria is important to China. Well, first of all, because of its geopolitical importance, its location. When we look at the Mediterranean, also the Sahel, and entry gate to the African continent, to the north of the continent, could make Algeria an important hub for the Road and Belt Initiative by the Chinese, but also Algeria's political influence around the Mediterranean and Africa at the continental level. There's another element that explains China's interest in Algeria, and that is business contracts and commerce opportunities. And some of those business contracts have to do with investments. We've seen the East-West Highway, which the Chinese have built a part of it. I think the contract was, the cost was around $12 billion. The Grand Mosque of Algiers. If you go to the capital, Algiers, you see the massive mosque that was built by the Chinese with a cost, it's not clear, whether it's just $2.5 billion. So these opportunities are of interest to China, together with access to raw materials and to the exploration of the existence of some raw materials in Algeria, especially in the south. There's another factor that has to do with the finances and Algeria's difficulties. I mean, once we're seeing the foreign exchanges going down very rapidly and not willing to go to external borrowing, maybe for international financial institutions. So the idea that China could be a friendly, external borrower without conditionalities that are normally attached to international financial institutions, it's not clear if that could help enough, or the amount of capacity of borrowing from China would be able to help Algeria in what many expect will be a rough immediate future. Also, the medical diplomacy that was mentioned, vaccines, medical equipment. There's also a very skillful way of playing that diplomacy as compared to what neighboring Europe is doing, at the lack of capacity or the lack of willingness to help and send provide vaccines to the immediate neighborhood, at least for the time being. Maybe later on through the COVAX initiative that would become easier. Turkey is also another country that is an increasing interest in the Mediterranean. We've seen it very, very clearly in Libya, which is a neighbor, and its immediate, involvement, direct involvement in support of the Libyan government based in Tripoli, military involvement through the use of drones, of fighters, of also assistance. So for Turkey, it's geopolitical relations with Algeria and some sort of alliance and more or less common interests. And Dr. Ghanem has published recently a piece at Carnegie about that. But Turkey also is interested in business. In Algeria, in Africa, also to expand its projection and presence in the Mediterranean. This is something that for France is not a good news, but it's part of also the Turkish foreign policy and expanding its influence in other regions. And there are other actors that are increasing their presence or trying to have also a space, be it some Gulf countries, Arab Gulf countries. We've seen also countries like the United Arab Emirates. During the Hirak times, it was a country that was mentioned frequently because of the perception that it had an increased role in Algerian internal or domestic politics, and also came with an economic, with other elements to expand its influence. So the foreign policies of Algeria are changing, the world is shifting, the African continent also is transforming, and that is putting new challenges and opportunities, both for Algeria and for its immediate neighborhoods, not only in North Africa, but also across the Mediterranean and Europe, and mainly Southern Europe.
Thank you, Dr. Haizam. Thank you for all your insight, for your analysis. We've shed light on the developments in Algeria and discussed what are the opportunities and the potentials for the Algerian government to bring stability and development in the country. Thank you so much.